If the world feels too loud today, you're in the right place. Let the sound of rain and a gentle voice help you drift off. Subscribe if calm moments like this matter to you. What time do you usually start listening? It was tucked inside a folded napkin, at the very bottom of a small tin box my mother had used to store loose buttons and broken earrings. The kind of thing you only find when you're not really looking, when you're sifting through drawers without purpose, letting your hands follow soft rustling sounds like they might lead you back to her. The key wasn't large, brass, smooth, worn at the edges, no tag, no inscription, just weight. Familiar and unfamiliar at once. I held it in my palm for a long time, just letting it rest there as if it might speak first. It didn't feel like a house key. The teeth were too shallow, the bow too small for something so permanent. But it wasn't delicate either. It had purpose, though I had no idea what that purpose was. I didn't ask aloud. That would have felt too loud. Instead, I wrapped it in the napkin again, careful not to disturb the folds, and placed it back in the box. But that night, I couldn't sleep, not for any reason I could name. My mind kept circling around that key, not with urgency, but with a quiet pull like a melody I almost remembered but couldn't place. The next morning, I returned to the tin box. This time, I didn't just unwrap the key. I took it with me, slipped it into the small zippered pocket of my coat where I usually kept train tickets or loose change. I didn't have a plan, just a feeling that maybe if I carried it long enough, it might find its own place. Or maybe I'd walk past something and feel it click a drawer, a gate, a quiet space I hadn't noticed before. Over the next week, I found myself touching the key more often, not obsessively, just lightly, like a stone in the pocket, a small weighted presence. I tried it on the basement locker, though I knew that key was still hanging on the hook near the fridge. It didn't fit, nor did it match the mailbox, or the small side cabinet near the entryway that had been painted shut since I was a child. None of it surprised me. The key wasn't for anything obvious. That somehow I knew. What I didn't know was why I felt it belonged with me. Why, this one item, out of everything I'd handled since she was gone, the receipts, the sweaters, the glasses lined up neatly in the cupboard, was the thing I couldn't put down. Maybe because it hadn't asked anything of me. It hadn't opened grief. It hadn't demanded a memory. It just was. Simple, closed, waiting. And maybe, somewhere inside that quiet, was the reason she kept it. Not because it unlocked something, but because it reminded her that some things are meant to be held before they make sense. I've kept it with me ever since. Still don't know where it belongs, but I've stopped asking out loud. I think it'll tell me when it's ready. I was at the station, out of habit, not need. I didn't have a train to catch, but sometimes I found myself there anyway, standing by the vending machines, watching people move in and out with purpose, while I stayed still, as if motion could be borrowed for a few minutes, just by proximity. That morning, I wandered down the hallway behind the waiting area, the part where the older lockers and storage units line the wall. Most were tagged or padlocked, dented from years of use. But one caught my eye. Not because it stood out quite the opposite. It blended in too well. No number, no scratches. Just a plain, narrow cabinet, painted a dull gray that didn't quite match the others. I stopped in front of it. I don't know why. I wasn't looking for anything. But the moment I reached into my coat pocket and felt the key, the weight settled differently in my hand. I didn't think. Just knelt down slowly and placed the key in the lock. No resistance. Just a soft turn, like it had been waiting without expectation. The door opened with a sound that wasn't loud, just old. Inside, nothing that mattered. A small paper bag, crumpled but clean. A folded scarf, light blue with faint fraying at the edges, and a tiny glass jar with 2 buttons inside. That was it. I should have felt confusion, or disappointment, or curiosity at the very least. But what I felt was stillness, not a dramatic revelation, not even a real memory, just the unmistakable quiet of being somewhere you were meant to arrive, not to stay, but to know. I didn't take anything, just sat down beside the cabinet, legs outstretched, letting the light from the hallway catch the edge of the scarf. It was the exact shade of one my mother wore when I was small. Maybe not the same one, probably not, but close enough to fold time just a little. The jar of buttons reminded me of the tin box, and the paper bag, well, I couldn't explain that part, but it made sense in a way I didn't want to question. I left the key inside the lock. It didn't feel like mine anymore. I closed the door gently. No click, no force. Then stood, hands in pockets, and walked slowly out toward the open terminal. I didn't look back, not out of resolve, just peace. Because for the first time since finding it, the key had completed its small circle. It hadn't unlocked a secret, only a softness. And somehow that felt like more than enough. After the station, I stopped carrying the key. Not because I was finished with it, but because it felt finished with me. There was a softness in that kind of ending, the kind that doesn't close but just releases. I kept walking though, same routes, same slow pace, except now. I started to notice things I hadn't before. On the bench outside the post office, I found a marble, deep green, with a swirl of blue inside, like a storm caught in glass. Just sitting there, alone, I picked it up, rolled it between my fingers, and left it in my coat pocket without thinking. The next day, a folded piece of paper at the corner of my building's elevator blank, except for a pencil drawing of a matchstick. No fire, no words, just the shape of something that once burned. I didn't know what to make of it, and I didn't need to. I carried it home, pressed it flat beneath a book I hadn't opened in months. Then came a smooth stone, warm from sun, placed carefully on the ledge outside my window. And later, a single playing card, the 5 of hearts left face up on the steps of the library, right in my path. None of it made sense, not as a message, not as a pattern, but each item had weight. Not literal, though some were heavier than others. It was the kind of weight you feel only when you stop asking why. A part of me wondered if someone else had started doing what I once did, listening without needing to understand, offering without asking. Or maybe, now that I had let go of one key, the world was simply offering others, not to unlock things, but to accompany them, to mark a rhythm I hadn't noticed I was walking to. I began to keep a small box by the window, not to collect, just to remember. Each object had its place, not categorized, not labeled, just known. I didn't tell anyone, didn't write about it, but it changed the way I moved. I looked longer at door frames, paid closer attention to the cracks in concrete. I started thinking that maybe the things we're meant to find aren't hidden. They're placed gently in front of us, waiting for us to slow down enough to notice. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there was doing the same, leaving, watching, waiting, not for a reply, but for someone to say silently, "I saw it. I see you." It was near the old bridge, just past the small playground that no longer had swings. The evening was folded in pale orange and deep blue, that soft half-light where everything feels both farther away and more present. I wasn't headed anywhere, just walking, letting the air carry me like it had all week. That's when I saw her sitting on the low stone wall beneath the street lamp, not young, not old, still, not waiting, not rushing. Her coat was buttoned all the way up. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, fingers loosely clasped, like she was holding something invisible and didn't want to drop it. Next to her, placed precisely between them and the edge, was a small metal tin, red, slightly rusted, familiar. I slowed, didn't mean to. My body just adjusted. She looked at me as if I'd already passed by and come back. No surprise, no hesitation, just acknowledgement. And then her hand moved not to offer, not to wave. Just one fingertip pressed lightly to the tin, like punctuation, a pause. I stood across from her, no more than a few meters apart. "Is that?" I didn't finish. She didn't answer, just nodded, once. I took a step closer. The tin was almost exactly like the one my mother kept, the one with the buttons and the earrings and the key. Not identical, but same shape, same weight. I could feel it just by looking. I didn't reach for it. That didn't feel right. Instead, I sat on the wall a little distance down. Let the quiet settle between us. She didn't look at me again, but she didn't leave. We sat like that for some time, not sharing stories, just sharing stillness. Eventually she stood, picked up the tin, carefully, like you would if something inside mattered deeply. She looked down at it for a long second, then placed it on the stone between us and walked away, no glance back. Just one hand in her pocket, the other loose by her side. I waited. Then, gently, I opened the tin inside. A paperclip bent into a heart, a torn-out piece of a map with the name of a city I'd never visited, and a small coin, foreign, unfamiliar, warm to the touch. I didn't understand. I didn't need to. I closed the tin, placed it in my bag, and exhaled. Not confusion, not wonder. Something softer, something like, you're still on the path, even if you can't see the road. It felt different, carrying something with the intent to leave it behind. I had chosen the marble, the green one, with the storm inside. It was the first thing I'd found since the key, and somehow the one that had stayed closest to me. But that morning, as I slipped it into my pocket, I knew I wouldn't be bringing it home. I didn't know where I'd leave it. I just started walking. The kind of walking where you pay attention not to the path ahead, but to the way the light falls against benches, the way leaves gather in corners, the way stillness seems to hum around certain places. The park was almost empty. A mother with a stroller, two pigeons dancing in the dust near the fountain, and me. I moved past the usual spots, the places where I'd once sat, once found, once remembered. None of them felt quite right. Then I noticed the short wall near the back entrance, moss-covered, shaded, half hidden by a cluster of bushes that had grown wild. The top of the wall was flat, clean, and quiet. I reached into my coat and placed the marble gently on the stone. No ceremony, no pause, just a placement, a hand letting go. I stepped back, just slightly, and stood there for a moment. The marble caught a bit of sun through the trees. It glowed, faintly, as if it were grateful, and I found myself whispering not to it, but to whoever might come next. Here, if you're looking for something, even if you don't know what. I didn't wait, didn't watch, just turned and kept walking. And for the first time since finding the key, I felt not just accompanied, but part of something. A soft pattern, a quiet chain. I had spent so long interpreting the things I'd found, trying to understand their meaning, their origin, but now, having left something behind, I realized the meaning wasn't in understanding. It was in trust, in believing that the right person would find the right thing at the right moment, just like I had. And maybe they wouldn't know why. Maybe they'd never know. But it would settle in their hand with a kind of quiet they hadn't felt in a while, and that would be enough. I started carrying a small notebook. Nothing fancy, just soft covers, cream-colored pages that didn't bleed through when I wrote with my favorite pen. I didn't know what I meant to do with it at first, but after leaving the marble behind, I felt a quiet pull to remember where things had happened, not for sentiment, for sequence, for shape. The first page simply read, Moss Wall, southeast corner of the park, green marble, morning light. The second, Old Bridge, under the third lamp, red tin, woman in blue coat, heart-shaped wire inside. No dates, no reflections, just places. Objects, soft moments. And slowly, the notebook grew. I began marking not just where I'd found things, but where I had chosen not to leave anything, where the stillness wasn't quite right, or where something in the air felt like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't a record, more like a shared pause, a way of keeping the silence intact while still honoring that something had passed through. Over time, I realized I wasn't the only one writing. At the base of the old fountain, someone had scratched into the stone faintly, carefully, a small arrow pointing to the corner ledge. And there, tucked between the cracks, was a feather. Bright yellow, clean, intentional. I smiled. Not because I knew what it meant, but because someone else had left something in a way that asked for attention without asking for credit. That night, I opened the notebook and wrote, Fountain Yellow Feather, left by someone who understands. I didn't feel alone, not like I used to. I still walked quietly, still spoke little, but now my silence was threaded into something larger, a map that wasn't meant to be followed in order, just found, piece by piece, when needed, like soft instructions for remembering how to notice. And maybe one day, when the book is full, I'll leave it behind too, somewhere tucked and dry, wrapped in cloth like the key once was. Not to tell a story, but to whisper, others came before you, and you're exactly where you need to be. There was a stretch of path behind the train depot, one I had passed a dozen times but never walked down. Nothing remarkable about it. Uneven pavement, chain link fence on one side, a wall covered in half-faded graffiti on the other. It didn't invite you in. But that morning, something in the sky felt slower, like even the clouds were hesitating. So I followed the path. The air was cool, dry, no sounds, except the faint clatter of distant tracks and the soft scuff of my shoes against gravel. I wasn't looking for anything. Not really. I had the notebook in my coat, but I hadn't opened it. My hands were in my pockets, fingers loosely curled around a small coin I'd found the week before. It wasn't meant for this place. I knew that the moment I stepped onto the path. Still, I walked. And as I reached the end, a quiet dead end, no bench, no tree, no object in sight, I stopped, looked around. Nothing, just a space. Not forgotten, not sacred, just empty. I stood there for a long time, longer than made sense, waiting, perhaps, for something to reveal itself, a glint under a rock, a mark on the wall, a fold in the chain link that said here, but there was nothing. And slowly I realized that was the point. This place didn't need a found object. It didn't ask for a ritual. It existed exactly as it was, bare, unheld, and in its emptiness, I felt something shift, a quiet echo in my chest, not loneliness, something gentler, like being in a room where no one is watching and you finally let your shoulders drop. I didn't take out the notebook, didn't leave the coin. I just exhaled, slow and even, and listened. And in that stillness, I understood something I hadn't until now. Not every space is waiting to be filled. Some spaces exist to hold nothing, and in doing so, they remind us of everything we've carried. I turned back slowly, not in silence, but in peace. And though I left with empty hands, I carried more than I brought. I went back to the station, not because I was searching, just because my steps led me there without asking. It had been weeks since the key, since the locker, since the soft presence of a moment that had stayed long after I walked away. I didn't expect anything to be there, and there wasn't. The cabinet stood quietly, exactly as I'd left it, the lock now slightly loose. The paint chipped a little more, but the space around it felt undisturbed, and that, somehow, felt like respect. I sat on the floor across from it, legs crossed, notebook in my lap. I didn't open it, just rested my hand on the cover. The pages inside held maps of things that had no destination. But even maps drawn from memory can show you where you are. I let my eyes drift shut. The hum of trains, the soft clink of heels on tile, the distant scrape of suitcase wheels, all of it folded around me like a blanket that didn't ask questions. I thought about the key, about how it had once felt heavy in my pocket, how I had searched for what it opened, like it might reveal something final. But now I understood. The key had opened nothing. It had simply pointed. It had asked me to look, to move slower, to pay attention. It had returned me to myself. not in some grand realization, just gently, gradually. I hadn't needed to unlock a door. I had needed to stop rattling the ones that were already closed. And in doing so, I had found spaces I hadn't known were waiting, people I hadn't expected, moments that didn't explain themselves but stayed with me anyway. I stood, brushed off my coat, left the notebook unopened, and as I walked back out through the terminal, I passed the bench near the window, the one I had never sat on before. This time, I did. Just for a moment. Nothing under it, nothing on it. Just a seat, just air. But as I sat there, hands in my lap, heart calm and quiet, I heard her voice again, my mother's. Not as memory, not as ghost, just as feeling, the kind that hums low and steady. You found what you were meant to. You can rest now, and I did.